Hello, and welcome to 4 key aspects of teaching and learning in synchronous and asynchronous learning environments, provided by Dell Technologies and Advanced Learning Partnerships. I'm John McCarthy, and I'll be your facilitator for this webinar in talking about this important topic. And we'll begin with the norms that we're going to use as you go through this video to be present, to collaborate with ideas, to be an active listener to others, and to be kind in our words and thoughts. As we go through this recording, there will be times when you'll be asked to pause this and reflect on the ideas that have been provided. These are the topics that we're going to be looking at: planning for virtual and blended environments, real-time, which is live, learning experiences and support, relationships matter, offline or asynchronous learning experiences and support, and responsive feedback is critical. So let's begin with planning for virtual and blended environments. And when we think about this, there are 5 key questions we always want to ask ourselves when we are planning, whether it's on-site or in a virtual or blended experience. To take a closer look, the first 2 questions are always just good for good instructional practice that we should all be doing, which is first and foremost, what are the learning outcomes? What do we want students to know, understand, and be able to apply? And then how will they demonstrate that through assessments to show what they've learned and perhaps what gaps still remain in what they understand? And once we have that understanding, then the next step is to think about what is our initial plan, our plan to where to get started. What is the beginning place, the baseline? And have that context, because then once we have that, we're going to make some adaptations, especially in a virtual blended environment, to provide that support, which is, what are you going to do for the students that are likely going to fail the assessment, which was step 2. There always will be some, or likely some, who will not be successful, and we don't have to know who they are yet. We just know that from past experience in teaching a particular concept or unit that this does happen. And so we want to prepare for them now before the lesson actually takes place, and embed those supports into a virtual experience. And then what we're going to do for the students who exceed expectations, far exceed them. In fact, they probably could have passed the assessment on the first day of the unit. What are we going to do for them so that they too can work towards gaining a year's plus growth in their understanding? Which set of steps will you focus on for deeper growth in your planning? Press pause, and when you're ready to continue, press play. So our next topic is real-time or live learning experiences and support. So when we are doing real-time instruction, virtually, it can look in a variety of different formats. We don't want to continue to just use the traditional format that we may be using in school in face-to-face, but look at some different ways of approaching that time frame with our students. So as we think about the first one, which is real-time instruction should focus on active learner involvement, these are some key areas that we should be looking at. So context really does matter. We have to make sure that the work the students are focusing on is going to be purposeful. It's going to make sense to them. It's going to be of value to them within their world of understanding. It's not enough that the curriculum is important for students to progress through the grade and progress and move forward in their education. While that is necessary, it's equally important that we build those connections of how these concepts and ideas and the practices and the tasks we give them are related into the world that they live in. For example, if we're teaching shapes, how might we look at architecture and see where the shapes are. How might we look at different areas in the house? Like, for example, we might look on the floor and see tiles. If the tiles are shaped as squares, we see that shape. If we combine squares, we get rectangles. If we look at pictures on the wall, maybe we have other shapes that we find. And so these are ways to build that context so that these ideas are not just some abstract notion that we want students to be able to understand. When we're focusing on active learners, what we're thinking about is that active learning means learners are active. And in a virtual environment, it's very important that students are not passive participants. So here are some different ways that we can address that. We can have breakout rooms that students can use to work in teams and groups around different tasks that are assigned by the teacher. It's also an opportune place to have breakout rooms where students are running protocols, where they're in small groups following a structure where they are leading the engagement process. Or maybe it's whole group and we're doing a fishbowl activity. And again, the students are given the guidelines and rules that define the work by the teachers, and then they take the lead and run that. We also want to chunk content, with reflection chats, because we want to make sure that students understand each component of the concepts and the journey that we're taking, so that at the end they can piece them together and see how they work together. Otherwise, the danger is that it could all blur together and they not understand or remember all the parts. It's also to really think about, the length of what a lecture might be. There is a place for lectures. It's important to have those types of conversations at certain times that the teacher might lead that. However, if it's 10 to 15 minutes, you might consider what is the value of the lecture. Is it something that could be recorded and then provide the students to watch prior to the lesson, the live lesson? Or is it something that, could be in a breakout room where they will watch about 5 minutes and then it would be stopped and they would then reflect and then they would move on to the next part. Anything that goes beyond 15 minutes really should be recorded and have students review so they can pause along the way to stay focused, because we want to maximize our real-time experience with students to ensure that the more that the students are being proactive and demonstrating what they know and don't know through their actions, the better that the teachers can address those needs that arise. When we think about real-time meetings, these are great opportunities for coaching, where we can work with small groups of students. Again, we can use the breakout rooms as stations, and one station can be the teacher, or the teacher can move into different breakout rooms on a scheduled basis to support students, as well as we can work with individual students. But this is having those real-time moments to talk with students and have conversations based upon their assessment data and how they are progressing. This is where we can help them move faster or overcome any frustrations they might have so that they can continue their journey both live and asynchronously. So another option is to have office hours, and this is a great opportunity to personalize support. Office hours is an opportunity that sometimes may be optional, where students sign up as they need help, or parents are aware of it and they can have their students sign up to be a part of it. And it can also be scheduled times where groups of students are to come through in groups and to provide support to them in that way. There are many ways that office hours can happen. The power of office hours is that you can truly personalize the support of students based upon what they need individually within that time period. So I'd like you to answer this question: which concept resonates most for what your students need more experience? And when you're ready, I'd like you to press play to continue. Relationships really do matter in the work that we do. As we think about understanding our students so that they can work and be successful, it's important to keep in mind that they are also dealing with the challenges of working from home. There's benefits and there's challenges, and there's a wide ranging of experience around that. So the more that we understand that is really important. And so these are some key areas to consider. So when we think about the challenges that they may have, we have to be aware of what is our perception about what's happening. And if we presume positive intent, that students genuinely do want to be successful, they do want to complete the work and show their growth. And when it doesn't happen, there might be reasons why. There might be legitimate reasons from the student's perspective. And if we can understand where that is, the better that we can help them move forward. And the more that we can presume positive intent, it really can be energizing for how we support students and get to know what the situation is so that we can be empathetic and supportive. And, we don't want to just assume that students just know how to work by themselves. And so for that reason, there are times that students are going to need guidance. They're going to need different ways to manage their time in this remote setting. And so having a variety of different tools can really support that. It's also important to think about how we check in with them, whether we check in individually or we check in small groups, whether we use coaching time or we use office hours or we use asynchronous approaches, through emails or reflection prompts where we ask them to respond and share about where they're at, how they're feeling, what's going on in their lives. Getting that type of feedback really helps us monitor where their focus is and if their attention really can be fully on the curriculum and content that we're working on. Which concept resonates most for your practice working with learners, and explain, and press pause, and when you're ready to continue, press play. At this point, it's good to take a moment and pause and think about what are some different traditional practices that really work well in a blended approach. Here are a couple approaches, such as differentiation, which also includes personalized learning, gamification, student-led inquiry, and project-based learning. When we think about differentiation, there's so many opportunities and value that can happen in a virtual or blended environment. Because as we talked about before, having coaching hours, doing office hours, doing stations, virtual stations allows us to work with students. To include embedded links that address just-in-time learning are just some of the different places that we can provide support, as well as video and audio to augment and provide students with different ways of looking at what they're learning. Gamification is a great way to have students experience and practice content for a greater length of times while at the same time intrinsically earning badges and achievements that are related to the work at hand. Free play gives them choices of options within which they can explore different resources and go deeper in that. It's important for students to be able to use protocols that really help them take the lead in their learning and explore questions and conduct research to reinforce their understanding as well as to expand into more questions, to go down a deep path of understanding the different concepts. And project-based learning is a great approach for having students take more lead in their learning experiences, as well as to have authentic learning experiences with audiences that will find the work of the students beneficial to their needs. And because students are leading it, it raises their engagement, as well as building context to the concepts in connection with the world that students understand and know. So which innovation do you want to explore more or find valuable for your learners, and explain? Press pause to answer the question, and when you're ready to continue, press play. Offline asynchronous learning experience and support is the other side of the coin to real-time learning and experiences. And there are a variety of areas that we can explore. The first thing is that when we go offline, it's a way to empower student voice for demonstrating what they have learned and what gaps they may have. And to do that, it's important to address these considerations when planning. We want to make sure that what they're doing is as connected to their world as possible. So when we keep it real, it's really about showing how the concepts are related to the world that they understand or are aware of, as well as potentially giving them voice. For example, talking to experts and others through virtual meetings that are supported by the teacher, where students might be either asking questions or sharing prototypes and getting feedback. It's also about giving them different ways and approaches to demonstrate their learning and explore. So using different multimedia approaches, videos, articles, and other types of media and modalities that enable students to explore concepts in different ways that helps them best understand the learning. And it's not that we give different students different types of modalities, we give them all. We let them choose what will work for them. And sometimes it's their interest that drives what they choose. And so as we make things interactive, it's about taking those assignments and embedding links and resources, such as what you see here in the list: voice recorded commenting, discussion boards, collaborative editing, screen recorded demos, and embedding links. These are all opportunities that we can build in, and we can also encourage students to build these in as well through their engagement and synthesis of understanding. And so as we think about this, another important thing is making work public. Taking their work and publishing it online, whether it's on a blog or it's through a shared folder in a way that, or through social media. What's important to do prior to this is always check with your schooling district regarding their guidelines for allowing students' work to be public based upon the permissions that parents and guardians have given. So explain how one of these listed ideas is valuable or important for empowering your students' voices. Press pause, and when you're ready to continue, press play. So when we talk about mastering the schedule, this goes back to the idea that students don't magically know how to do these things in a school setting. And so while some can, there are many who might need support and guidance, and we need to provide that for them, to give them some digital structures, such as a shared calendar where you might have the work so that they and their parents and guardians can see it. Or maybe they keep a daily plan, physical or digital, for themselves. And so as we think about this, these are some ideas to move forward with. One is, when you provide a schedule, you might leave some areas blank. So in this example, for an assignment, there are multiple steps to the assignment with due dates already filled in, as well as the amount of time it's suggested it would take to complete it. And then students are asked to put in the date and time at which they will do this work, and they have to combine this with the due dates so that they can pace themselves along the way. Also, take assignments and chunk them, using a checklist so that students understand not just what steps need to be done, but how those chunks work together. So for example, here, we might chunk the first 3 steps: outline, first draft, main ideas, and first draft introductions, as one chunk. And then the next chunk might be peer feedback and second draft. The next chunk would be teacher feedback, third draft, and the final submission. And that way, instead of seeing this as 8 steps, the students see 3 chunks that they have to accomplish. And it's also important to do check-ins. As teachers, we don't want to wait a week before we check the progress of our students, because by then it might be too late. So we want to make sure that we're checking in periodically along with those chunks so that we can make sure that if there are students who need more support, we can provide it. If there's students who are way ahead, we can adapt for them so that they continue to grow. So which concept resonates most for your practice working with learners? And explain. Press pause to post your reflection. When you're ready to continue, press play. Feedback is so important for students to receive, both by the teacher and by their peers. And so here are some examples of approaches that we can use with our students, as well as we can practice ourselves. Giving feedback can be really challenging, and sometimes the way it's heard can be difficult. So using these type of starter stems is one way to give feedback, as well as to teach our students to give feedback to each other. I notice is for identifying ideas that work or that people appreciate. I wonder is used to identify potential issues or gaps that may or may not be there, and then become invitational for the author to use or not use. And what ifs are suggestions, and it gives advice that again is invitational. And so whether we're typing or recording our responses, we use these prompts. We can also use this in the virtual live sessions as well. Talk moves is a great way to give students discussion stems for how to have conversations. So you'll see that there are 5 categories here that are listed that students can use. So for example, if they disagree, rather than saying you're wrong, instead they use one of the prompts, such as the second one. I respectfully disagree with what so-and-so said, and I think blah, 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 blah. This can again be done in real-time conversations, as well as in posting comments, both written and recorded. Think before you speak is actually a strategy that's used with digital citizenship. And so it's a way to help students remind themselves and reflect on the steps they should take to ensure that what they post digitally and what they say digitally is the most professional and appropriate as they can think of without reacting, without thinking. It's also important to think about what is the turnaround time for responses. So the suggestion of 30 minutes to 2 hours is more about when students are sending instant messages or emails where they're in the middle of doing a task and they're stuck. We want to get back to them as quickly as possible so they don't get frustrated and just put the work aside and then they don't do it. Up to 3 hours is also fits within that same area of support, and sometimes even with discussion boards. And again, it depends on the situation. 12 to 48 hours is when students have turned in assignments, because you want to make sure they get feedback within a timely basis so they can use it. Now, all these time frames are just suggestions. You might decide at your school or district to have a different set of time frames. Whatever those time frames are determined, it's important to strive for that so that we're always meeting the learners based upon where they are at and what they need. Which concept resonates most for your practice working with learners, and explain. Press pause to reflect. When you're ready to continue, press play. This ends this video regarding this topic of 4 key aspects of teaching and learning in synchronous and asynchronous learning environments. I hope that you've gotten a lot from this and can use those reflections you've done to apply to your practice as you continue this work. Thank you for participating.